Now for our final part of our hands-on exercise, what I'd like to do is take you through working with Git for data. Okay, but first, before we can actually walk through doing it, we need to kind of understand what the concept is. So let's talk a little bit more about sort of how Nessie works as a catalog. Okay, so imagine that we, as a catalog, so Nessie as a catalog has a listing of all the different tables. So in this case, we've had tables like weather, and Nessie knows that that's pointing to a metadata.json. So we'll say metadata.json. And then we had our names table. And we'll say that's at the version 1 right now. Okay, now typically your typical catalog, this would be it. So basically what would happen is that, hey, when names changes and there's a new metadata.json, it would just then update this listing. And that would say v2.metadata.json. So that means what the old version was is no longer referenced, and you could never figure out, hey, what was the older metadata.json? It's just no longer information that's being tracked. But Nessie, on the other hand, does it a little bit different. So essentially what happens, we have this list. It starts off with v1. Okay, we can probably make this a little bit smaller now. Yeah, that's perfect. Okay, so then what happens is that it creates another commit. So the table changes, and now this becomes the new head commit. Okay, the head of the branch. Okay, but notice that they're different. But so when I time travel in Nessie, when I say, hey, I'm going to go query the catalog as it was in the past, what I'm saying is like, hey, when I access different tables, I'm accessing as they are at this point. Okay, but even more exciting is this whole concept of branching. Okay, so if this is the main branch here, okay, so this is the main branch. Well, let's say we decide to create a branch called ingest. So we're going to add some records. Well, what happens is that when we create that branch, what it does, it creates a new sort of history of changes starting with the newest commit on the branch that I branched from. Okay, so technically we start there. So now I can start making changes. So let's say I update names. Okay, so that's the first change. So that changes to v3. And then I update weather. So I update weather and I put that there. Okay, so now weather is going to be at v2. So these are just, again, all the catalog is a reference to, hey, this is the metadata.json you have. All that other information about the table is nestled in the metadata that's discoverable once we get to that metadata.json. But basically now, if I were to do something like this, like if my query is select star from weather at branch main, well, then it's technically going to see this version of the data. So it's going to technically access v1.metadata.json. It's going to access the table as it was at that time. Okay, because that's the head of the main branch. And if I were to change this to add branch ingest, well, then it's going to query this version of the table because that's the head of the ingest branch. So it'll see that data that's been added that isn't currently visible in the main branch. Now, this is great because oftentimes you want to make changes to your data. You want to bring in new data, but you don't necessarily want all your end users to see it yet. Okay, why? Because you haven't tested the quality of the data. So now that I've ingested the data, I could go do all my quality checks, check for nulls, check for duplicates, check for incorrect information, clean up the data, and then once I know that the data is clean, then I can do a merge. And what the merge does is it'll just take that commit and then bring it over to the main branch. So now the main branch is now back in line with all the changes that I made. Okay, so basically what happens is that you went from both tables, and notice that like both tables were updated from this commit to that commit. So you've effectively done a multi-table transaction. The changes to both tables became available to your main users, okay, literally in a moment, by being able to, one, isolate all the changes you've made across all the tables in the catalog, and then publishing them all at the same time by merging those changes back into your main branch, which is generally what your normal users are going to be using. Okay, so that's sort of the concept of here of Git for data, because that's how Git works for code. You generally have these different snapshots, and you're always able to go back to the past snapshots, but you're also able to create branching paths of those snapshots. And that's what makes this all, well, so particularly pretty awesome and special. Okay, and enables so many different sort of possibilities. So now that we've established that, let's actually do an example so you can kind of see this at work. Okay, so we're going to just delete all this. We'll create a whole new table. So we're going to create a table called Nessie.Places. And it's just going to basically have a place, which is going to be a bar chart field. And that's it. Keep it really simple. Okay, and then we'll insert some places in there. So insert into Nessie.Places, values. And we'll start off by inserting Orlando, Austin, Santa Clara. Okay, so I'm going to run these two queries, and that's another cool thing you can do with Dremio. I can actually have multiple queries in the same window. So instead of me having to do one at a time, I could just, again, separate each query with a semicolon at the end, and then I can hit run, and it'll run both queries. Okay, and you'll see like it has one query for the first one. Now I've made some sort of mistake, so let's take a look what I did. The number of fields and values cannot exceed, oops, yep, my mistake is that each individual one should have its own parenthesis. So this should be like that. Okay, oops. There we go, that should fix it, but I can't create the table again. So one thing I could do is I could actually add if not exists. So if you add if not exists on a create table statement, what it does is that if the table already exists, it just skips and moves forward. So that way I don't have to like delete the line, but I don't necessarily break, cause another error. Okay, so I'll hit run. Okay, cool. And again, you notice how there's a tab for each query. So I can go see the results for each query. So you can see that table already exists. And here are 3 records were inserted. Okay, again, quality of life in the Dremio UI. Very nice. Cool. So now we've done that. So now let's take advantage of this whole branching thing. So now what I have is right now I'm working off the main branch. So what I'd like to do is create another branch. So I'm going to say create branch. And that whole if not exists thing I can do here too. So if not exists. So only if the branch doesn't exist will it create it. And the name of the branch will be ingest, just like in our visual example earlier. And we need to specify, hey, which catalog? Because it's possible that I might have multiple Nessie catalogs. So which catalog am I creating this branch in? So I'll say in the one that I called Nessie. Okay, now if I run this, there we go. Branch ingest has been created at branch main in source Nessie. Wonderful. So the branch now exists. If I click over here on Nessie, I can now see that there's 2 branches. There's the main branch and the ingest branch. So again, not only can I see the commits that are on this particular branch, okay, I can also click on here on ingest and I can go see the commits that are on the ingest branch, which right now they share the same commits because nothing has changed since they branched. Okay, so I'll keep that on main for now. But let's actually make some changes. So what I want to do is that I'm going to want to switch over to the branch and then make those changes. So I'll say, hey, use branch ingest in Nessie. So that'll be my first query. And basically what this means is that it's going to say, hey, anything going forward is happening on the ingest branch, not on the main branch. So in this case, I'm going to want to insert into Nessie.Places. Values. Then we'll say Chicago. Seattle. Boston. Okay, so I'll run these 2 queries. So again, this will change the context, and then this will allow me to do an insert. Okay. Oh, oops. Okay, so you see what I did, just so you're very aware, because I was highlighting this query, it ran that query only. Because basically when I hit run, if I highlight queries, I can be like, hey, only run that one by highlighting it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change these. So we're going to say, hey, Nashville, Miami, and New York City. Okay, and then I'm going to put my cursor right here at the beginning just to make sure that's going to run both queries. I hit run. So now see it's switching the branch. Okay, and then again, these 3 rows are inserted. So Nashville, Miami, and NYC were inserted specifically on the ingest branch because that previous query ran. The previous 3 that I meant to add got probably added on the main branch since that first query didn't run. So it's going to default to that main branch. So let's just like show that at work. So let's say select star from Nessie.places at branch main, and then select star from Nessie.places at branch ingest. Okay, now if I run this, okay, I see the 2 queries have happened. Now if I go to the first one, I see 6 places. Okay, so I don't see Nashville, I'm not seeing Miami, I'm not seeing that because again, this is the main branch. And notice how it highlights which query I'm looking at the results of as I switch tabs. Okay, again, quality of life features. But here, if I take a look at this one, I see 6 records: Nashville, Miami, NYC, Orlando, Austin, Santa Clara. Okay, and the reason being is that those other 3 records weren't inserted. So I just realized I've created a problem. Okay, because now what's going to happen is I've created a potential conflict. Okay, so now because now there's a change that happened on the main branch before it started. So there might be a chance I might not be able to successfully merge this. We'll find out. Okay, because generally what happens is that now you have basically what happens here is there's going to be like two different histories of changes to the table. So it won't be, see what I wanted was this, where basically as I change things on ingest, there were no other changes on main, but because I made that one mistake, I did. But let's actually play that out so you can actually see what this error would look like if this is the case. It might be able to figure it out. We'll see. But if I want to merge that branch in, essentially what you would do is you would do merge branch ingest. So I'm saying I want to take the stuff that happened on the ingest branch and I want to merge it into the main branch in the Nessie catalog. Again, I'm anticipating that this should have a merge conflict. So because now there's new data on both branches. So it's not going to know sort of, hey, how it's supposed to reconcile that. But let's take a look. Yep, and see right there, failed due to a commit conflict. Okay, so keep that in mind. So lesson learned, again, you want to make sure that, hey, once you branch, don't make changes to the original branch until you're done making, and you've done and you've published your changes on your secondary branch. Okay, there are ways to sort of handle that, but that gets a little bit more advanced, where you can actually kind of talk about how to handle conflicts in the merge branch syntax. But let's actually do this again. Okay, so let's now go back and let's branch again. So we'll call it like ingest2. So we're going to create a new branch, create branch if not exists, ingest2 in Nessie. Then we're going to switch to that branch. So use branch if not exists. I mean, we don't need the if not exists there. That doesn't make any sense. Ingest2 in Nessie. Then we'll insert some data into the table. Insert into Nessie.places values, and we'll just insert one value for now, just to kind of illustrate it. And we'll put in let's do Mexico City. And then just to confirm that, this time everything worked out right, let's do a select star from Nessie.places at branch main, and then a select star from Nessie.places at branch ingest2. Okay, so let's put this cursor all the way here at the beginning. Run all of these. So again, it's running all of those queries. Nice. So we can see here that we created the branch successfully. We see that we've switched branches. Okay, I've added the additional record. But when I take a look at main, I don't see Mexico City. Good. So that means I've isolated the changes successfully. And query 5, I do see Mexico City. But again, because I didn't accidentally make some additional change on the main, so main has been untouched since the branch, now I should be able to successfully merge the data. So now I can be like merge branch ingest2 into main in Nessie. Cool. Okay, and then again, we'll just do those two queries. Star from Nessie.places at branch main, select star from Nessie.places at branch ingest2. Okay. Okay, so let's see here. In this case, we successfully merged. I see Mexico City on main now. Okay, so I've now published the changes that were in ingest in there. So again, I'm keeping these sort of isolated changes. And like other cool things you can do is you can create a branch that you never plan on merging. This is great for like creating experimental environments. And the beauty of this is that when you create a branch, you're not actually duplicating the data. Okay, all you're doing is you're just creating a different history of changes. So everything up to that point is shared history, which means you're not, duplicating, triplicating the data as would typically happen when you're setting up experimental environments in production data workloads. Okay, so this actually can really reduce your costs. It also reduces a lot of the work because, hey, if I made a mistake, I could always just set the catalog back to a previous commit. I can always go back to a previous commit and say, you know what, let's undo these transactions. Okay. And another thing you can do is something called tagging. Tagging is being able to take a particular commit and give it a name. Okay. So let's pretend that I want to just basically create a tag for the current commit. Okay. So we'll say create tag. Okay. Create tag, we'll call it, checkpoint in Nessie. So it's going to take the current commit and tag it with the name checkpoint. Okay. Create. Now here's the thing. Sometimes you get a hint that maybe something's wrong with the syntax when the syntax highlighting isn't what you would expect it to be. I'd imagine that those would both be blue. So just to confirm, make sure that I'm good. It's always a good habit to go check the docs. So I'm going to head over to docs.dremio.com. Just to make sure that I'm using the right syntax. Dremio Cloud SQL, SQL commands, and here we go, create tag. So I'll go just look at some examples. Create tag my tag. Okay, but I want to make sure this is in the right catalog. Okay, and then again, you can actually specify a particular commit to be tagged. So the syntax looks right. So not too worried there then. So I'm going to create this tag. Oh, I accidentally opened up Visual Studio Code there. Okay, I'm going to create this tag. I'm going to run it. And now I've created this tag. So what's the benefit of this? It makes it easier for me to go back to previous commits because then I don't have to memorize all these commit numbers. Okay, so see how each of these commits have these big long numbers. But when there's a tag, so you can see here tag, so there's a tag checkpoint, what I can do is, let's say I make a few more changes. So let's say, hey, I insert into Nessie.places values. Let's put in Tampa. Okay, so now I'll do a select star from Nessie.places at branch main, but then I'll do a select star from Nessie.places at tag checkpoint. And then make sure I close each of these off with a semicolon. And let's watch what happens. Now, all three of these end up playing out. Okay, so if I go there, I inserted that new row. If I go back to my main branch, there's Tampa. Tampa got added. But if I go back to checkpoint, there's no more Tampa because the tag tags a commit before we added Tampa. Now, how can this be used? Imagine that you're ingesting data every day, but you want to make sure that there's always sort of like an end of month tag, so that way there's sort of like a clear, hey, this is the end of month point when we want to like compare data between months or go back and take a look at how the data looked like so many months ago. And the cool thing is that when a commit is tagged, it prevents it from getting that particular commit from being cleaned up during cleanup operations. Okay, so that's pretty cool. So there's a lot of benefits to using Nessie specifically as a catalog with your Apache Iceberg tables because you get all these Git for data features at the catalog level. Yes, there is table level tagging and branching for individual tables, but then you have to do it again for each individual table. While with Nessie, you can do it at the catalog level. So again, when I make this tag, so if I create that end of month tag, it applies to all the tables in the catalog, and now I can replicate the whole catalog by just referencing one single tag. And again, using Dremio, I can easily just set that as my context. So I can click here and say, hey, I'm changing the context, and just set the context to that tag. So that way when I run my query, I don't even have to specify it. It's just going to run it within that context. Okay, which makes life, again, a lot easier. So hopefully you guys have enjoyed getting hands-on. There's plenty more to learn to get used to doing data lakehouse engineering. But what you have learned is you've learned what Iceberg tables are. You've learned how to kind of do SQL and see sort of the effect on the storage system when you write that SQL with Iceberg tables. You've learned about Git for data. And the cool thing is you've known the basics about how you can use Dremio to bring data into Apache Iceberg tables. And the cool thing about Dremio is that once you have all these data sets curated, so let's say here we have this rather curated data set, okay, it has features for you to easily bring them into your favorite BI tool. And again, most BI tools are going to have Dremio integrations so that you can pull data directly that you've curated directly in Dremio into your favorite tool to create charts, diagrams, business intelligence dashboards for your business. So that whole path becomes really easy to execute. So with that, I'll see you all later on. I'll see you in the final video. We're going to discuss places where you can learn more because there is so much to learn.